You joined us for Rain of Blood, and together we made it rain bigger and better than we could have ever imagined. So now, join us for a second blazing inferno of knowledge and exploration. You're listening to Rain of Fire, the scorching sequel event to Rain of Blood, where we're going to delve into the world of fire play education and safety as we prepare for the upcoming Rain of Fire event. Join your host, Miss Kitten, Radically Dark, and Ember Solaris as we ignite your curiosity and stoke the flames of passion with discussions, interviews, and authentic insights from around the globe. Together, we're three flames united in one mission to make quality kink education more accessible and open pathways to conversation and connection about edge play topics around the world. But before we dive into these sizzling topics, a content warning. Rain of Fire discusses mature themes, explicit content, and practices related to BDSM and fire play. So listener discretion is advised, and this is an adult-only podcast. Other topics may include mental health, trauma, consent, and more. So please be sure you're in a good spot to engage in these topics before continuing to listen. So grab your fire gear, stoke the flames of curiosity, and let's embark on this crackling journey together. Welcome to Rain of Fire.
Hey, amazing fire starters. You are chatting with Miss Kitten, and I'm really excited to welcome Daniel virtually to my dungeon to talk to us a little bit more about fire and brands and all warm things that spark an interest. Daniel, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to chat to me tonight and for supporting us with Rain of Fire.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kitten, for having me on the podcast.
Yay. So, Daniel, I'm not going to lie, my chief interest was your branding on your FitLife profile. But before I go into that and ask you all about the specifics, maybe you can give my listeners and myself a little bit of about your journey and how you went from your muggle world of being really vanilla to this deep, dark fantasy world of kink. How did you get involved, and what did the journey look like in your case?
So nothing terribly exciting, but probably relatable to many people. Honestly, I don't know that I've ever had a day that I wasn't kinky, even as a preteen. I was kind of into drawing women in chains and, all kinds of kinky ideas before I even realized it was a thing. As far as, kind of getting into community, I've been married for about 30 years, somewhere around 20 years of marriage. My wife and I kind of we had dabbled with kink off and on and had really wonderful experiences. And I ran into this podcast, Sex Nerd Sandra, and was listening to that. Listened to a lot of podcasts, taking a lot of types of media, and they mentioned FetLife. So I went out and checked out FetLife and told my wife all about it. And it's like, there's a local community here where we're at, that does all this really cool stuff. We should go check it out. And she was all for it. And so we basically, went down the rabbit hole. So that's how we kind of got started on our journey, at least in community.
I love that. And I love that you've done it with your wife, and this has been something that you shared. I think that's really cool. I also love that you've been married for a good period of time, and that she's a focus even in this podcast in your life. I have appreciation for that. So
she is a pretty phenomenal person. So
that's pretty cool.
I'm very lucky.
You are very lucky, and I'm glad that you have looked after her for this amount of time. You get my stamp of approval for that. How did fire enter your journey in kink?
So at some point in our local, play sessions, we ran into some people who were doing cupping, fire fleshing, fire massage, those types of activities. And I'm attracted to anything that's kind of edgy. So immediately that caught my attention, and I started talking to everybody I could to learn more. And I started out specifically with fire cupping and fire fleshing, fire streaking. From there, kind of started playing around with flash cotton, those kinds of things. I didn't, I took my time with all of those. Fire to me is one of those things. It's not a matter of, if it'll bite you. It's a matter of when it will, and you have to become as knowledgeable as you can to try to avoid, mitigating your risk, essentially. But that's how I got introduced into it. Over time, I've gradually picked up more and more types of play. A few years back, I took an intensive with Sir Athens, and started, doing some other types of play, fire glove, variations on fire cupping, like fire log, things you don't see quite as often. And then after that, I found, the closest person I could that had a lot of experience with fire caning and fire flogging, and got a lot of one-on-one instruction, and kind of started doing that as well. So I do a little bit of all kinds of fire play.
Yeah, you've mentioned some really exciting things. I've only seen fire caning once on a video, and it looks fascinating. So I'm really excited to see a little bit more of that. We hopefully will have Echo doing it for us at our Rain of Blood festival. So I'm excited to see that. We don't have much fire in my community.
Cool.
Yeah, and I loved what you said about taking it slow. I think it's not the Olympics, and even if you want to get to the Olympics, you have to have baby steps and a good foundation. And fire is one of those things that is never going to be able to be mastered entirely, and you are going to make a mistake at some point. So like you said, having all the basics and knowing as much as you can about it is hugely important. It's difficult though when you're not in a community that has like a whole bunch of mentors. So it's been really a privilege just speaking to everybody about it. What is your favorite thing to do with fire now that you've had experience in so many different avenues?
I guess I really like the more sensual and the flashier side. So it's kind of two things. I like doing massage and then following that up with fire cupping. That's a more connective kind of activity, and doing, fire fleshing, fire streaking, maybe some percussion type play. For me, any of those are probably come first. After that, my next favorite is whatever's kind of got a big wow factor to it. And the fire flogging and fire caning definitely fall into those categories. I guess I don't care as much for the things that are super quick though. Like flash cotton is it has a massive wow factor, but it goes so fast that I don't know. As a top, I don't really get a lot out of it. It's fun for audiences.
I have to say with flash cotton, it's the one thing that it doesn't matter how many times I play with it. The adrenaline rush is still so frigging intense when I light it. And it never gets old. It's like I hadn't played with it for absolutely ages, and I'd forgotten how incredible it was. Like you're instantly present, like nothing else matters in the moment. For those sort of 3 seconds, the sort of world stops, and the only thing that's happening is happening in the palm of your hand while you're holding the flash cotton. And I'd forgotten about that. Like it's super intense. I'd forgotten just quite how intense it was, and I pulled it out the other day, and it was a good reminder that it's definitely a fourth grader than me, and it deserves to be respected. I'm learning about wands and really enjoying the process. And I love what you said about that there's an intimacy in the play with the wands and the fire massage. Yeah, I really like that, and it's a great reminder about how kink can be calibrated, and you can have something that's really flashy and edgy, but fire can also be calibrated to be warm and sensual and kind and
Yes,
intimate.
exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. My main play is Sharp's play, so it's an incredibly intimate experience, and I didn't quite realize that I was going to find that in fire as well. But it has the same qualities as Sharp's play. You have to be super present, like you can't not be with the game, because the game is much bigger than you are, even bigger than Sharp's. And you get to share a moment where the intimacy is even more intense, because I think both parties are so present because of the level of edge play. So it's super cool. I haven't seen fire flogging. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your experience with fire flogging?
Fire flogging is mostly for most people, at least bottoms. I think that the biggest thrill that comes out of it is kind of the mind fuck of it. This person is standing behind you, and a lot of times I'm doing this with a partner who's in front of the person as well. So we do this kind of rig where they go and they stand and they put their hands on either side, and I'm fire flogging from front or behind, and the other person is on the other side, and we kind of get the timing such that we're both coming up and starting to flog at the same time, and it's just this. You light up the flogger, and you've got that first few seconds that you're trying to burn off the excess fuel that you didn't manage to cast off before you start swinging it for play, and it's really loud. There's whoop 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 kind of sound coming off of the flogger, and the bottom can hear that as it's getting closer and closer, and the flash is going past them every time that you get close to them. And so there's this huge mind fuck that goes with it, because we're taught from birth to fear fire, fear things that are really hot. And then, you get those first couple of strikes, and you back off, and you throw it 2 or 3 times, and then you couple of strikes, and they feel the first couple, and they kind of run from those a little bit. Of course, with the setup that we often do, they can't really go anywhere because there's somebody in front of them and behind them. So it makes sort of, very intense second or two there. And of course, the first couple of moments that we make contact, they're very brief. And we step back and watch to see what they're going to do. And then, step in and you do it again. By the third time, they're kind of relaxing into just the experience of feeling the flame make contact with them. And it's just warm, and it's almost like getting a massage if you're really making contact. Now, different people play with it very differently. There are some people who never actually make contact, and they're just mortified by the idea that we make contact with the fire floggers. And there are techniques that you can use to help, to know if you've got any cast off on the bottom, and you can quickly, put that out so that you can see it and react to it before it creates a burn. So we've, over time, you get really good at that. Like if it happens, they don't even usually know that they've had a moment that, they've either had hair on their back that was on fire, or a little tiny amount. It's not any worse than like streaking or whatever, doing that kind of play. And, but then, 30, 40 seconds later, you get down to the point where you can hit them every time with it. And then it really does get to be very much like a massage. And the whole thing might last all of a little over a minute. And then usually it takes them another 20, 30 seconds to really process, did I really just do that? And then usually you see them dance around a little bit, and they're like, again, please. And it's just wonderful to watch people light up and have that experience the first time. But I also have to say that people can have very different responses to it. I've had several occasions where I was, fire flogging at convention type settings, and we wind up with a line of people. It'd be like 30, 35 people lined up to be fire flogged. And I've had situations where the first time that I hit them with the fire flogger, they immediately went into subspace. I actually have one that kind of scared me when I made contact with his backside, and he just kind of collapsed, and I grabbed him before he hit the ground, and I'm swinging the swagger off over to my right, trying to keep it from being still so that, flames are not coming up and kissing me, and I'm simultaneously holding him, and I'm like, Spotter, come grab this guy.
Wow.
And his dominant comes up and it's like, that was amazing. I've never seen him go spacey that fast. She's like, this is what he looks like when he goes really spacey. And I was like, wow, that was incredible. Like, and once I knew what was going on, I was good with it. And it was like, that was, a really great experience, in retrospect. In the moment, it was a little bit scary, but so, you can have, everything in between those two reactions, really. And it's, I guess, driven by that fear factor, I think.
Yeah, I don't think you ever quite know how you're going to react until you are in the moment and it's happening to you. We had an interesting experience. We're quite new with fire, and but we have a very established team that plays together in a lot of different kinks, quite a lot. So we communicate well and we have a good understanding. And we did just fire bubbles on each other's hands so that everybody had an opportunity to have the experience. And just having a look at the 7 different reactions in the room was so interesting. From like morbid curiosity to like intense fear, to the one person in the room that we expected to handle it super in her stride and not react was the person that got a big fright when we lit the bubbles and shook her hand and shook the bubbles everywhere. And there was a second of mass confusion while there were fire bubbles in the air and everybody was a little bit worried about where they were going to land. But it was just really interesting with sort of 7 established kinksters and everybody's reaction. If you'd asked me to sort of predict what was going to happen, I would never have predicted that the woman who reacted to it and had a complete I don't want to say meltdown in a bad way, but sort of had a very abrupt fear reaction to the situation was the one person that would handle
reaction.
it. Yeah, I thought she would have handled it the best out of it, and it was something that she's generally, we actually call her Mother Russia because she's like this really solid, really solid. She's my dungeon doomer. She's always the one that picks up the pieces. She handles every situation with calm and tranquility and a plan. And she was the one person that didn't have a plan with fire, and she panicked. And it was so interesting, but it just a great reminder that I think that as a top, you don't know how the bottom's going to react, and so maybe starting off small is not a bad idea because then you can handle the situation better when it happens. But interesting.
That's true.
It's been a super interesting kink from that side for me. It's explained personal responsibility in such a clearly defined way. Like I think I take a lot of responsibility in the dungeon automatically as the top. Like I automatically put myself in that role. But I think fire's been like the one kink where I have realized that everybody has to take that personal responsibility, from the bottom who has to be able to use their voice, to the spotter who has to be able to step in and do their job, to me as the top. It has to be so clearly defined, and people have got to be accepting of that. Like it's not like with Impact where you could maybe take one more hit and bear with the situation. If it's getting too hot, you have to use your voice as a bottom. So active bottoming, being responsible for how your body's reacting to the situation, it's like chronic. It's like life and death. Like you really have to chat now. So just a different aspect of kink, and my kink has always been on the edgier side, and I've always taken risks that have fitted into my risk budget. And I love to risk mitigate. I think admin's part of my kink journey, but it's probably more my kink as I get older than actual kink. But fire's been an interesting one because it's something where that personal responsibility doesn't just fall on me in the room; it falls on every single player. And everyone has to be showing up, and I found that quite interesting. So even listening to you talk about the fire flogging, like it's something that there's a setup, and everybody in the setup is taking equal personal responsibility. And I find that that's not something I always experience in kink. I think as a top, we tend to take more than in other kinks, and not let people have as much anonymity in the situation. So I found the journey quite interesting from that side. I was really fascinated by your branding on your page. Do you want to chat to me a little bit about your branding journey and what you've experienced with branding?
Sure. My first experiences with, I guess, any kind of branding or scarification were with cell popping. Once again, it was one of those things that I encountered in my local community, and found a mentor to help me learn all I could about it, and kind of went down that rabbit hole, and so any form of scarification is of interest to me, and I've always had an interest in liquid nitrogen. I've seen several brandings that were done with like hot iron type brandings, but looking at the after effect or the end result of those, I've never found those to be visually pleasing. They almost always cause so much cellular damage. The larger ones, cell popping, if you take your time with it and you go back and you do it multiple times, you get this nice end result, and you can make it permanent if you want to. Like with any kind of scarification, even when you're trying not to, sometimes it can be permanent. It's one of those risks that you have to know and be comfortable with. So things like that have always really attracted me, something like the cell popping. But when I was looking at like the hot iron type brandings, I would look at the end result of those, and while I was fascinated with the process and seeing people endure that as a experience, it didn't really like the aspect of the masochistic side of it, the sadomasochistic side of it is appealing, but visually it just didn't do it for me. And then at some point I encountered my first liquid nitrogen branding photos, and I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. The end result is something that has a very nice look to it. It's often temporary in terms of months, and for some people it can be a permanent thing. So it immediately caught my attention. It was something I was interested in, but it was one of those things, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, where there's just not a lot of people out there that do it. And finding a mentor if you're interested in being a top is difficult. Finding an opportunity for experiences can be a little bit difficult if there's nobody around. And so Self, which is Southeastern Leather Fest, just happened recently in Atlanta, Georgia. And I saw that on their schedule, they had somebody who was teaching or was going to do a liquid nitrogen demo as opposed to teaching. And immediately I was considering going to Self, and I was like, okay, I have to go do this. Like this kind of cinches it for me. And the actual experience of it is quite interesting. I went in and I had this expectation. I'd heard stories as a child from my grandfather about liquid nitrogen and things that had happened when he worked in the gas company. And so I was very scared of it. I had this image in my head, kind of like, out of Terminator, where you get doused with liquid nitrogen and your body just kind of breaks up, and so I went in with a very natural, don't want to say fear, but respect, that this could be a thing that I'm going to watch it and not be into it, because it may be, there may just be too much risk there for my risk profile. And much to my surprise, it was more approachable than I really expected it to be. There definitely are things about it that, and the guy who did the demo did an excellent job. His name was Oz the Third. If you want to look him up on FetLife, he's an excellent presenter. I would highly recommend going and doing his demos. But he did a really good job of talking about the realities of liquid nitrogen and what the dangers are and how you can mitigate those. And how he made it very approachable. And so we decided that we wanted to do a branding while we were there at the demo. He offered that up for everybody, and the actual experience, they put the liquid nitrogen into a container, and then you take the branding iron and you place it into the small container of liquid nitrogen, and it immediately starts boiling, and it takes it probably a minute and a half, something like that, to go down to temperature. And as it gets close to temperature, you can actually see it. The boil becomes way more vigorous, and it's pretty intense. And then it kind of settles out, and they pull the brand out, and it's ice is making its way up the rod, so it's cold. And they press this thing to your skin, and there's this split second where there's pain. Different people who did it described it very differently. For me, the closest sensation that I can compare it to was the sensation of a yellow jacket stinging, in terms of the feeling, but it was nowhere near the intensity. It was like maybe a tenth of that intensity, but it was larger. It was the full size of the brand, so it was spread out over a large area. So overall, it's an intense sensation for that split second, and then there's no pain at all. And you basically leave it against the skin 1 second for essentially every month you kind of desire to have it. And that's a general, that's kind of a general guideline. It can vary anywhere from 1 to 3 months, I think he said, for each second. And for some people, it actually winds up being a permanent thing if they leave it long enough. Even that 10 seconds can be enough, which was kind of the maximum that they set in the class, which is, if you look at the photos on my profile, that's how long I did, was 10 seconds. After he removes the brand, there's probably about 30, 40 minutes where there's no real pain or anything. And then this burning sensation starts to build. And I would liken it to touching a really hot surface like the inside of an oven, or a cooking vessel that's really hot. It's that sensation, and it starts out really mild and works its way up over about a 30-minute period to a really strong burning sensation, and then it kind of plateaus for a little bit and then starts to ramp back down. And that entire ramp up and down for me might have been an hour or something like that. And after that, there's it's just kind of like any burn. It kind of blisters over or whatever it's going to do, and there's no real pain or anything. It's just, you just treat it like a burn until it heals. And at this point, I'm I don't know, nearly 2 weeks out, and it almost looks like it's just a healed over brand. There's no scabbing or anything, so pretty quick heal time too.
Yeah, and it's I think the one thing that's always struck me with the micro branding is it's really difficult to regulate the depth of every burn that you're putting on there, and you're putting so many on there, so the healing becomes a little bit jagged. My work with sharps is always very precise. I like the finished picture to look very precise. So I've always found the micro branding something that I've avoided doing, because it's just something that I couldn't qualify the end result to the quality that I wanted it to be. So I haven't approached it, and I've been a bit scared of it, because it is probably more permanent than I would want something that's not perfect enough to be. In my own head, it just doesn't fit my profile. But the one thing
exactly,
yeah. So listening to you talk, I was like, hell, I so relate to that. And I saw a nitrogen brand that had been done on somebody's cock, and it was almost perfect. Wow. It was just, the outline was just, the edges were so neat and tidy. It just ticked all the boxes for me. So I just really loved it. And even looking at yours, the work is it's really precise. I like the precision that goes into it. I have to ask you if there was a smell that came off when the ice touched the skin.
Actually, no. I don't recall any kind of smell with it.
Yeah, you see, that's a surplus. Like the smell from branding also is something that I'm slightly
burning flesh.
Yeah, not my best. Apparently, you can put big fans on. The people I've spoken to said if you put 2 fans in the room, it really helps, and wear a mask. But
Burning
I'm
flesh
not sure.
is definitely not a pleasant smell.
Burning hair is currently like my worst ever, and I'm not great at fire yet. So I'm having the burning hair experience a lot. Like it's something I'm reliving. I'm doing quite a lot of fire to get better at it, and it's something that I'm living on a daily basis. And the burning hair smells great because it's like the gift that keeps on giving. You get to smell it when it happens, and then you get to smell it again when you go and shower. So it's like this reminder of like what you did 15 minutes ago and how you weren't great at it then. And anyway, you said something about the fire floggers that I really liked, and I think that's the one thing that I really like about fire is that beautiful sound that comes off the floggers. I can only imagine it. We do quite a bit with a fire whip. We have an African version of a fire whip that we've crafted. We don't get much Kevlar here. We've made it ourselves. It's but the experience of the whooshing through the air. And I was wondering what if there was any sound that came off the brand when it hit the skin.
I don't recall there being a sound. I actually performed 2 brands on other people while I was in the demo, and I do not recall there being any sound off of any of those.
It's so interesting.
It's a really so the biggest thing that you notice about it when you're doing it is the liquid nitrogen, cooled brand is so cold that as you're moving it through the air, the air around it kind of it creates that smoky, frozen air effect, and it follows the brand as you move it through the air. In fact, if you look at the photos that I took real time during the branding, you can see the trail in the air where the brand is being pulled away from my arm, and then the moment when it's being touched, you can see a little poop of what looks almost like smoke coming off of my skin where it's freezing the skin. That's the biggest thing that you really take notice of.
Oh wow! Was there anything that you did with the brand specifically for healing? Is there any way you were treated differently to a hot brand?
So we did put burn cream on it. Let's see, trying to remember. I've got one of the packs right here. I'm sitting in my dungeon. Well, I said I did. I think the burn cream's actually missing in it. But essentially, you just use a standard burn cream. You do want to avoid the ones that are white. You want the clear kind, because if you do have any kind of complication with it, you have a blister that has any kind of problem or anything, you want to, if you go to the ER or to see a doctor, if you put the kind that's white or has color to it, they'll actually scrub that off, which is quite unpleasant. And then we also have Aquaphor and triple antibiotic for later. If it kind of if you get blisters, you can put the Aquaphor on it, and if you wind up with a blister that busts, you can use the triple antibiotic on it after a day or two later. Usually you don't get any blistering until a couple of days after. And all of that really kind of depends also on what your healing process looks like. Some people are real bad to blister. Some people don't really blister much at all.
That's so interesting and such a great tip about the putting the cream on afterwards, and making a good choice and researching your product that you're going to use for aftercare, and just taking that little bit of extra personal responsibility. And then also knowing your skin type. I think bringing that to the party with something like this is quite important. we do a lot of we talk a lot about self-care being the start of good aftercare, and having a great understanding of, like, the skin for me is a canvas, so having a great understanding of my canvas and how my canvas heals and what my canvas thrives on and what is good for my canvas. It might not work for somebody else. So, you know, for me, I'm allergic to alcohol. So
and that
my
is
skin
a
reacts.
really, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So I was going to say that that's a really good point where the liquid nitrogen branding is concerned is, you know, knowing what your healing looks like is very important, because if you're a person who, you know, your skin tends to, let's say, keloid, well, you know, there's a good chance that it's going to be permanent. If that's the case, your skin, you know, if it keloids over in those places where you do the branding, then that's probably going to be something that never really goes away. And if you're a person who blisters really badly with burns, your likelihood that it's going to be, you know, some kind of permanent scarring is much higher. So being aware of how you heal is definitely an important thing.
Yeah, and then you know, if you are going to put it somewhere, if you are unsure of how you're going to heal, picking a place that is less visible is probably also advisable. And like
Definitely.
unlike blatantly obvious in the first one, and, or, you know, starting small for the first brand is also a great idea. Then you have a great idea of the process. I think in all the kink stuff that I've experienced, the one thing that I've learned is you never really know until you know. Until you've done it, you don't know what you don't know. And the only way you find out what you don't know is by doing it. And the entire process, it's not just the experience in the moment. It's the entire healing process that makes up the kink, and understanding what that entails. The best way to understand that is to go through it. So, you know, maybe starting small and having a small experience, and then you can grow from that. Is this something that you would look forward to doing again?
Yes. In fact, I'm, you know, continuing to do research to learn more about, you know, safe storage and handling of liquid nitrogen. And eventually I would like to play with it, you know, in my home dungeon setting and you know, elsewhere. I also, in the same demo, we did flogging with flowers, where we took flowers and dipped them in the liquid nitrogen and allowed them to completely freeze, and then we flogged, you know, the bottom with the frozen flowers, which was a very interesting sensation for them, and it was really cool to watch the flowers kind of disintegrate, you know, as they're making impact 2 or 3 times. And then another thing we did was kind of sensual play, where we massaged the petals of the flowers into the back of the person after they were frozen, the bottom, and that was a very interesting sensation for me as a top. I would love to experience that sometime as from the bottom side as well. It looked like it was very enjoyable, and it was definitely a lot of fun to do. So those are types of play that I'm very much looking forward to doing. You know, here once I feel really confident with my ability to approach it safely and you know, do proper storage and handling.
I think that's so interesting. You're opening a whole can of worms for the little South African who had never seen this. I have to ask you with the flowers, with the impact. I love that. I love flower flogging. Especially with roses, is one of my favorite things. I think you can do so much with that. I think you can really play beautifully with it. You can choose really spiky roses, or you can choose really soft roses. You can do it for a CBT scene and cause a lot of damage. You can do it as essential play. You can also get quite hardcore rose stems and use them almost as canes. There's quite a lot you can do with them. So you're ticking all the right boxes. Do the flowers shatter like we see on?
Yes, they do.
They do.
It's not a like, they don't completely shatter with one blow. The first time you make it, so with roses, the first time you make impact, the outer petals that are loose shatter and they go everywhere. But the tighter packed petals remain solid, and you can get a blow or two out of those that's kind of thuddy. So that first one is kind of lighter and has I think a little bit of a sting to it because it's so cold. And then the inner layers are not quite as cold, but they're cold enough and dense enough that they'll take 2 or 3 impacts. So you get this nice couple of thuddy impacts before it kind of continues to disintegrate. The type of flower matters. They also used any other time I could think of the name of it.
That's okay. We like to put our guests under a little bit of pressure.
So the flowers that are clusters of really small petals are very impressive. When one of those makes contact with a good swing, it just disintegrates and explodes everywhere. The whole thing does, and it's visually it is very very showy. It's very interesting to see, and I hate that I can't think of the name of that flower.
It's okay. Are the shards of the petals hard or soft? Are they is it like ice where it's like a hard shard, or is it like soft?
So that first blow is kind of soft when they shatter. And then the ones after that are a little harder. They're not frozen so solid that they just shatter everywhere. Like I said, you kind of get a little thud out of the flower, what remains of it. And of course, some of it depends on the type of flower. Once again, that's a rose. If you're using a flower that's made up of lots of little petals and doesn't have a dense center, then it's very light and just kind of shatters everywhere. And most of the sensation comes from how cold it is.
And is there a risk of burning somebody with the nitrogen when you are hitting them with a flower?
No.
Okay.
So the place where you have real risk with liquid nitrogen of getting burned is if for some reason it gets on your body and it gets trapped. Like, let's say if a person were laying on their back and you kind of poured this stuff over their stomach, if it went into like a belly button, it couldn't freely flow, right? And so what happens is that when it initially goes in, you get this what's called the Leidenfrost effect, where the difference in the delta and temperature between the liquid nitrogen and the person causes it to boil and basically creates this vapor layer between the liquid nitrogen and the body. And I'm not a chemist, so don't quote me on all of it, but this is my understanding of it. And so you wind up with it kind of floating in that space until it manages to cool the body enough that it can close that gap and not boil. And then once it closes the gap and makes contact with the body, then it starts to burn the skin or freeze it. And initially it's frostbite. If there's enough of it, it's trapped long enough, it continues to harm the tissues below. If you were to take someone's arm and put that into a bath of this stuff and leave it there for a significant length of time, you could get something akin to the Terminator effect, where you hit the arm and it just kind of shatters. But as long as it can freely flow and, you're in motion, your odds of that, as long as it's not a lot of it, of having a burn from it are, very low. So that it's all in the handling of it and knowing how to handle it. And I would highly recommend, if someone is interested in doing liquid nitrogen play, getting with someone who is an experienced top and letting them show them all of the things that they need to do in terms of, proper handling and proper usage in play, because, I'm hitting the highlights. There's a lot you need to know.
100%, and it's you are sparking an interest. But I think with any of these edge plays, the research and the risk mitigation and the skill isn't born overnight, and it is definitely a journey. My brain is on fire. Thank you. You've really sparked an interest. So I'm not sure I can find a top who plays with liquid nitrogen but there is a cooking guy that has a little restaurant down the road that uses it, who might be able to show me some really good safety considerations, maybe just using the product, which might be a very good place to start. So I'm already trying to think outside the box, because my community is a bit small and I don't think we've ever heard of this in our lives. So finding a way to approach it. Finding a way to approach it I might need to think outside the box, but I'm definitely going to keep thinking, because it sounds fantastic. And I'm really grateful for your share. And I'm going to get hold of the top that you worked with and see if he'll chat to us as well. Just taking a chance, because it's so lovely to be inspired by different kinks and to learn new things as we get older. I am very grateful for your time tonight, and for you coming on and chatting to me, and accepting my request for this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Yay. And I'm going to say to all my listeners that I'm now newly inspired, and I'll keep you all posted about my journey. We still have tickets for Rain of Fire. If you haven't got yours, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Our On Demand goes live on the 1st of July. We have some incredible classes that will be available as a resource for a month. So please get your Rain of Blood tickets sorted as quickly as possible. Get registered so we can share these links with you. If finances are a barrier to participation, we have scholarships available. Please reach out to our team. We all believe that education is for everybody and shouldn't be a barrier to participation. And we are really excited to keep bringing you some exciting Kinksters tidbits, and to keep you updated with everything that we're doing. And from my dungeon all the way in Cape Town, lots of love and kitten kisses.